Hey, this is Todd. I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about the diversity and Dungeons and Dragons article that Wizards posted. I know I am late to the party, so this is old news, unless you've been living under the proverbial stone in the D&D corner of the hobby. But I thought it was important to touch on. I thought the first thing I'd do is really just read the article. I don't know how many people have read it versus just reading a tweet or some other social media post that references or a snippet. So let's just read the whole thing, and then maybe I'll have a few words to say out about it. We'll see how it goes, but let's give it a read. Dungeons & Dragons teaches that diversity is strength, for only a diverse group of adventurers can overcome the many challenges a D&D story presents. In that spirit, making D&D as welcoming and inclusive as possible has moved to the forefront of our priorities over the last 6 years. We'd like to share with you what we've been doing and what we plan to do in the future to address legacy D&D content that does not reflect who we are today. We recognize that doing this isn't about getting to a place where we can rest on our laurels, but continuing to head in the right direction. We feel that being transparent about it is the best way to let our community help us to continue to calibrate our efforts. One of the explicit design goals of 5th edition D&D is to depict humanity in all its beautiful diversity by depicting characters who represent an array of ethnicities, gender identities, sexual orientations, and beliefs. We want everyone to feel at home around the game table and to see positive reflections of themselves within our products. Quote, human, unquote, in D&D terms means everyone, not just fantasy versions of Northern Europeans, and the D&D community is now more diverse than it's ever been. Throughout the 50-year history of D&D, some of the peoples in the game, orcs and drow being two of the prime examples, have been characterized as monstrous and evil, using descriptions that are painfully reminiscent of how real-world ethnic groups have been and continue to be denigrated. That's just not right, and it's not something we believe in. Despite our conscious efforts to the contrary, we have allowed some of those old descriptions to reappear in the game. We recognize that to live our values, we have to do an even better job in handling these issues. If we make mistakes, our priority is to make things right. Here's what we're going to improve. We present orcs and drow in a new light in two of our most recent books, Eberron Rising from the Last War and Explorer's Guide to Wildemount. In those books, orcs and drow are just as morally and culturally complex as other peoples. We will continue that approach in future books, portraying all the peoples of D&D in relatable ways and making it clear that they are as free as humans to decide who they are and what they do. When every D&D book is reprinted, we have an opportunity to correct errors that we or the broader D&D community discovered in that book. Each year, we use those opportunities to fix a variety of things, including errors in judgment. In recent reprintings of Tomb of Annihilation and Curse of Strahd, for example, we changed text that was racially insensitive. Those reprints have already been printed and will be available in the months ahead. We will continue this process, reviewing each book as it comes up for a reprint and fixing such errors where they are present. Later this year, we will release a product, not yet announced, that offers a way for a player to customize their character's origin, including the option to change the ability score increases that come from being an elf, a dwarf, or one of D&D's many other playable folk. This option emphasizes that each person in the game is an individual with capabilities all their own. Curse of Strahd included a people known as the Vistani and featured the Vistani heroine Esmeralda. Regrettably, their depiction echoes some stereotypes associated with the Romani people in the real world. To rectify that, we've not only made changes to Curse of Strahd, but in 2 upcoming books we will also show, working with a Romani consultant, the Vistani in a way that does not rely on reductive tropes. We received valuable insights from sensitivity readers on 2 of our recent books. We are incorporating sensitivity readers into our creative process, and we will continue to reach out to experts in various fields to help us identify our blind spots. We are proactively seeking new, diverse talent to join our staff and our pool of freelance writers and artists. We brought in contributors who reflect the beautiful diversity of the D&D community to work on books coming out in 2021. We're going to invest even more in this approach and add a broad range of new voices to join the chorus of D&D storytelling. And we will continue to listen to you all. We've created 5th edition in conversation with the D&D community. It's a conversation that continues to this day. That's at the heart of our work, listening to the community, learning what brings you joy, and doing everything we can to provide it in every one of our books. This part of our work will never end. We know that every day someone finds the courage to voice their truth, and we're here to listen. We are eternally grateful for the ongoing dialogue with the D&D community, and we look forward to continuing to improve D&D for generations to come. All right, so there you have it. It's obviously, look, this is a corporate statement by a large corporation. So it's written very well, written very diplomatically, covers a fair bit of ground. I think the big thing for me is, look, they're recognizing that things have been going a certain way, or things have been left to be in a certain way mostly because of just tradition. That's the way it was, so we'll just keep going with that without much thought given to how can we make things better. Now, I will always say, look, this is a good step for them to do. I'm not going to nominate them for a Nobel Prize because they're a big corporation and they're just picking now to do it, when this is something that really they could have done a long time ago. These issues with racist species like orcs and drow are not new. These conversations go back a long time, and they've chosen up until now to be silent about it, but now is a very socially conscious moment, and they are pandering to that moment. Now, I say pandering, and people, I think, who are against these will jump on that, or they will agree with me saying, yeah, look, they're just pandering. But listen, if there's a thing to pander to, it's this. This is the kind of moment that is good to pander to. Some pandering is good. I think we often look at and say, oh, they're just bowing down to pressure and that they should always stick up for this thing. But no, they shouldn't. We look at the value of the thing you're sticking up for and look at it and say, is this worth sticking up for? Do we feel like potentially racist, outdated tropes, ethnic tropes, are something that we should be standing up for because that's how it always was done? Probably not. Is slavery, for example, something we ought to stick by? No, probably not, right? There are better hills to die on. And by the way, if you're a player or a GM and you steadfastly believe that orcs and drow should just be a certain way and that's the way they are and the lore says so because the orcish god, that's how he did it, whatever, you're free to make a branch of Forgotten Realms or of your own homebrew campaign and keep your orcs and drow however you want them to. That has always been your right. But this is for the official line of products, and it should be the most, particularly given that, look, D&D always presents itself as the fantasy role-playing game for everyone. These changes will help reflect that it is meant for everyone, and you are free to, at your table, dial it into a narrow experience that's for you and your audience. But just think about why you're doing that. If you're really clutching at, but orcs must be evil and they must be this way, think about yourself, well, why must they be that way? Because I think when you go back to things, let's say, take race as class, right? We go from the white box and then it goes into a BX and you have race as class. And a lot of people, particularly after a while, rebelled against race as class because it did not reflect the spectrum of identities that we hold. Why do all elves have to be just one way? Humans can be all kinds of different ways, but elves and dwarves and halflings, they just have to be that way. Why can't I have a halfling that's a cleric? Why can't I have a dwarf that's a magic user? They're too limiting. There was no real good reason, and sure, you could make up lore for it. You could say, oh, well, the dwarves, they abhor magic because their god did that. And same thing with orcs. It was really, the lore didn't come first. This idea that they had to be a certain way came first, and they created lore to support it. But then, obviously over time, they dismantled that part, right? Race as class isn't a thing. Now, any race can be any class. And we all look at that and think, well, that's a good thing, right? I don't think anyone would want to go back to saying, no, dwarves can only be either a fighter and a lesser fighter at that, or just a dwarf type. Elves can only be the elf type or, a fighter magic user. I think we all appreciate that it can be more diverse. So why shouldn't it be that way with orcs and drow or these other peoples? There's no reason. The second thing is that I think that a cultural basis of evil is a lot more interesting than some kind of genetic disposition towards evil. I think it's much more interesting to think of, to use I know it's a stereotypical historical example, but Nazis and Germans, right? Nazis are bad. I think you would say most of them. And you could point out some, oh no, this guy was a Nazi and he was okay. Okay, just look at it at an overall level. Nazis are bad. But we know that not all Nazis, not all Germans are Nazis, right? So you have the Nazis are in control of Germany. They're doing awful things. We think Nazis, the guys walking around in the uniform, they're bad. But we know that Germans existed during World War II, that weren't all Nazis, weren't all bad. In the same way, orcs can be living in whatever kind of society you want with leaders who are bad, even with divine forces that are pushing them towards bad, and yet some of them don't have to be bad. In the same way that you can have a character like Drizzt who is drow but isn't bad. And those kind of things lead, I think, to a richer experience. I think they're more interesting questions to ask about cultural disposition towards certain alignments or just towards certain codes and individuals who may butt up against it, both good and bad, right? And it's something I think that we like to look at in other ways. The elves that are trying to destroy everything because they have a twisted version of what it means to be an elf, or what it means to preserve the things that elves love, and that they would destroy the things they love because of this idea they have that they need to preserve things or that things are getting away from them. I think that's a trope that gets used a lot. Well, that's kind of an elf going against a lot of elfish things, stereotypically elfish things, but it makes for interesting characters in the same way orcs that decide to rebel against whatever cultural structures are in place that have them going down a certain path towards evil can be interesting. And of course, it leaves you open, which I think a lot of people do in their homebrew anyway, by the way, that maybe orcs aren't evil at all, or drow aren't evil at all, and they're good, or they're just in a spectrum like everybody else. And it's that whole thing. I think so many games get rid of alignments anyway. I usually find myself in the one defending alignments, but more often than not, 9 times out of 10, people are saying, I hate alignments, I hate the restrictions, I hate all that, get rid of it. Well, if we're getting rid of it, then yeah, let's get rid of it. And let's just say, yeah, orcs can be whatever. They're not limited to a certain alignment. Drow aren't limited to a certain alignment. I mean, a lot of people already play with the fact that different dragons don't necessarily have to be the alignment that their color would dictate from the monster manual. These are all changes that we do on a homebrew level, and now the game out of the box is simply going to enable more people to do that in their own game. And before we discount that, I will say that so many times I run into conversations where people are stuck on what is in the books. What is in the books is important. As much as I or somebody else can say, listen, do your own thing, run your own game, play it the way you want to play it. Don't worry what's in the books. They're just suggestions. So many conversations end up boiling down for a lot of people who play this hobby in what is in the books. And that is why this is important, because people are going to follow what's in the books. And by the way, that stuff affects not only, it's not just a one-way street. People are going to bring their prejudices in, and when they see a spot in these books, in the fiction, that fits their prejudices, they're going to pour that in there, which is bad. And they can also take it back out and reflect it into the real world. If they're impressionable and they hear stuff about the race of orcs, and then they hear that same stuff maybe applied to people who exist in our real world, it's far too easy to make a connection in a way that is not positive, and there's no reason to help that kind of behavior. It may happen anyway. Let's try to avoid it where we can. But having it in the books is a big deal, because so many people take the books and really run with them and go to it and point to, like the Bible, they will go and they'll point to verse and line and say, this is what it says, and that is the law. So changing these laws has a big effect. And I know a lot of people who maybe watch my videos and listen to me and talk to me may come more from that, why homebrew a lot or do whatever, but still you can't really underestimate how important it is to get these changes in the book. So the books reflect the diversity of the people who play this game. And for too long, the game has really reflected a certain type of person, and everyone else has kind of either bent the game to them or bent themselves to the game. And now they're acknowledging that, and it's not going to be perfect, it's not going to be easy, and they're going to make mistakes. I think with the Vistani they mentioned in the article, I believe it's been pointed out that the 4th edition of Vistani was actually a lot better, more progressive, more modern take on it than the 5th edition version of Vistani. The 5th edition in Curse of Strahd went backwards for whatever reason. So it's going to be messy. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to not fix stuff. They're going to do it. But at least they're showing on the right track. And yes, it is a corporation, and they're doing it because they're in this moment and they feel like they have to respond. But there's nothing wrong with that. I think that the more the hobby reflects what everybody, just the more people it's going to bring in the hobby and make comfortable and allow people to come in and play. And I think there's kind of a running theme here. I think you see it when I've talked about the stuff that's come out, the Critical Role kind of things. It's all about broadening the audience. And people will complain that they're leaving behind their core. Oh, I've been with the game forever and they're ignoring me. They're not ignoring you. You're already in the fold and you're probably playing in a custom campaign that you have set. You don't really need them. They don't need you anymore, in a sense, in both the kind of capitalist raw sense of, hey, look, you've already invested in this. We don't need you anymore. And just for the sense that you're already set. We're trying to capture new. We're trying to get it new. We're trying to set up for a new generations of players. And those new generations are going to come at it with a very different eye than old timers like me, or people who came with early editions, or even people who maybe came in when 5th edition first hit. And they're trying to make the game reflect that. And I think that's ultimately a good thing. And hey, by the way, if you don't like it, rewrite it. Rewrite it to fit your image. Just be aware that when you're making this, it is your image, and reflect on that, what that means with these things. Because I think there might be some self-discovery for people who are too caught up in, well, I have to have it this way. Think about that. Well, why do you? Why can't you have exceptions? Why do all your species X have to be exactly like that? Is it just because that's the way it always was, or is there something else? You might discover something about yourself. Maybe that seems presumptive or, arrogant on my part. I don't know. I'm sure that if I go back and I look at my stuff, there are tropes I have used in the past, and I go, oh gosh, I should never do that again. I'm sure if I looked at stuff I did 20 years ago or 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, I would find stuff that I go, not so great. Right. The thing is, we all need to do is not just wizards, but all of us as creators, whether you're doing stuff like I am on the internet and your own stuff, or you're just doing your own stuff, is to always just reflect on what we've made and how we can make it better and how we can make sure that it's open to everyone. And you never know who comes into your table who gets turned off by the fact of something you have that you never thought about. So maybe it's good for all of us to make our own little document of looking back at all our stuff that we've made and think, how can I make this better? How can I make this more reflect my values? And I get it, there's supposed to be, a lot of times fantasy particularly, there's evil with capital E in the world doing nasty things, but we don't have to necessarily engage with all of that, right? We don't talk about what adventurers do to go to the bathroom in a dungeon. Do we know in real life that people need to use the toilet and relieve themselves? Sure, but we don't go into that in the game. Why? Because there are things that we can kind of gloss over and pretend, just hand wave away for the sake of the game. And in the same way, you can look at it and say, well, in medieval this and this, they did that and they did that and they thought this and they thought that. But you think about it, is that really necessary to the game? Is my game really enriched by that? Or am I just using that to bolster something that I need? And if it's just for me, my personal whatever, then not to say you have to get rid of it. Maybe you should think about it. Anyway, stuff to think about. I'm glad they covered it. I'm hoping when these new reprints come out, I have some of these already. I'm probably not going to re-buy them just to look at what they've changed, but hopefully we'll get some errata or something that we'll go over so we can see exactly what they're doing. And hopefully we'll get a lot of these coming up, or hopefully not a lot because that means they're doing the right thing, but that this will be an ongoing thing that we'll be able to track and they'll be transparent about it. And we can all enjoy the game, and new people can enjoy the game, right? For me, I could have stopped at first edition really and had all the materials and stuff I needed and be set, but that's not what they're after. So, they're trying to bring in new people. So let's all bring it in. Let's all make sure, as they said, let's all of us make sure the game and any way we contributed is there for future generations to enjoy, and it doesn't become something cringeworthy that your kids or your grandkids are going to go, oh my gosh, I can't believe they did that. I've gone on too long. I'm recording this on a Friday. It's hot. You can see I'm sweating under just the light of my kitchen, so I'm going to let you go. Hey, just a word, if you like these videos, thumbs up really helps. Subscribe if you want to know when I'm posting new stuff. I don't have a set schedule. I'm going to try to be more consistent, but particularly on our new coronavirus universe right now, it's difficult. I've got a Patreon and a Ko-Fi. I try to release stuff for subscribers and whatnot when I can, usually on some kind of monthly schedule. I'm trying to get better about that too. So those are ways you can contribute, but have a great weekend, or whenever you're watching or listening to this, have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you later.